Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with KPP Live, the show that's dedicated to providing you with advice for life so that you can live richly and work towards the life that you've earned. My name's Kyle Roy, as always, your host, financial advisor with Kentucky Planning Partners. Proud to be joined with my friend and colleague, Ben Hopper, CFP Extraordinary. And today we're going to ask the question, encourage you to find your risk score. What is your risk score? What's your risk tolerance? How are your assets allocated relative to how you want them to be allocated? Everybody we meet, when you meet with a financial advisor, what do you want your money to do?
Grow.
You always want it to grow. And people are always disappointed by how little it is growing potentially versus what they think it should be. And what we're going to talk about is risk, understanding risk. What is risk? And at the end, we're going to walk through how we at Kentucky Planning Partners help our clients gauge their risk score. So hold on to the end, because at the end we're going to help you recognize whether or not you have a risk score, and if you don't, come on in and talk to us. We'll help you with that.
Sure.
So risk. What is risk, Ben?
That's a great place to start. We need to define it. Risk is essentially the chance that you could lose. Chance that you could lose your money. Chance that you could lose something of value to you. And so with risk, we know that there's different outcomes that are potential. And so risk is just the chance that what you expect isn't exactly what happens.
So effectively, risk is the propensity or the likelihood that your portfolio is going to lose money, right? But here's the thing: risk is a bit of a spooky idea, because people think that if their money, if it never goes down, if you had $100 saved under your mattress 10 years ago and you have $100 today, that you didn't take any risk. But that's not true. So risk isn't just how your value of your asset might move. It's really what your asset is worth, right? So let's talk about a risk that has really been coming into the forefront more as of late than we've seen in the last decade. What's the big eye everybody's worried about?
A big one that we've been talking a lot with clients recently and with ourselves is inflation. So inflation is a big topic, especially as we saw with COVID-19 last year. We saw the Fed pump a lot of money into the system with their policy. And so that's just one of the reasons inflation has picked up. We saw 5.4%. We've got some presentation material from BlackRock, one of the partners that we use, and with some really good inflationary data, but 5.4%, which is pretty much double what we've seen in the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s. Inflation at 5.4% is a high metric that we just saw recently.
So effectively what that means is if you had $100 a year ago, today that $100 will buy you what it would have cost $105 a year. I'm sorry, it would have taken $95 a year ago to buy what costs $100 today.
That's right.
Is effectively what inflation means. So the value of your dollar has gone down by 5.4% from this time, which is August of 2020, to August of 2021. The last 10 years, the average inflationary rate has been about 1.2%. So we're 5 times the last 10 years average. So now there are a lot of reasons for that. We're not going to go into that really today. We're not going to go into why inflation's higher because we have an extraordinary event with COVID and the amount of stimulus that's coming through. But if you felt in the last 12 months that your money in the bank or the money under your mattress has been safe, now granted it hasn't lost any value, but it has lost purchasing power, right?
And where do we see things like that? We see things like that in gas prices a lot of times. We see them in the cost of housing. The real estate market's been white hot, right? We see things like just going to Walmart or Kroger and buying goods, buying food, buying drinks. Inflation affects everybody. We see it in cost of business and labor and what people are paying to work. Inflation affects everybody.
You know, my biggest, the biggest and most clear example of inflation for me is when I was a kid. Remember going to the grocery store and you walk down the cereal aisle and you get the family pack of Frosted Flakes or Cheerios, and literally the box was like bigger than you. And they even used to have the big square boxes, the cubes, with the 2 massive bags of cereal, right? Now a family pack is like a little itty bitty box, you know? The price hasn't gone down, but the amount that you get goes down, right? So that's another way that they trick you with inflation. That's another example of inflation. But let's talk about other risks, right? So what are some other risks for those people that put their money in their mattress, right? They think that they're not taking any risks because their money's safe there. But what are some other risks that might happen to those assets?
Well, what if you forget about it? You could forget it's there. A lot of people know that they've put money somewhere, but they forget where it's at because it's actually physically located, and they have to keep track of it. It could also be, there could be theft, there could be robbery. There's risks that people maybe don't think about when it comes to investing and holding cash. To your point, Kyle, that's important to realize.
Fire, right? I think about my grandparents. My grandparents' Depression era, and they literally would keep cash like hidden all over the house. And I remember my grandfather had we would forget, like we'd have no idea. You'd be sitting on the couch and all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, here's a $20 bill. I'd be like, that's where that was, right? So that's a serious problem. Or if God forbid something happens to you, you don't know where you're putting cash around the house. So for many people who think the most safe place to have their money is cash at home, not only are you losing potential purchasing power, but you're also losing, or you risk losing the money, right? So that, I think, is an important aspect for many people out there. It might be basic for some, but we don't want to take for granted the fact that many people do that, especially if they're afraid or don't trust the system, right?
And now, inflation risk and holding cash is really just one type of risk that we've discussed so far. And in the financial world, there's all sorts of different kinds, and we won't get into it. You've got longevity risk. You've got risks that are in the system, risks that you can diversify away from. There's all sorts of different terminologies that go along with that. But what's the real reason, as investors and financial planners, risk is an important topic? Why do people take on risk? That's an important question.
Yeah.
And it's because the theory says the higher the risk that you take on, the higher you expect your reward to be. The higher the risk, the higher reward potential. The lower the risk you take, the lower the reward potential. So there's a risk-reward trade-off, is what we call it, that is important for investors to realize. Traditionally, if you're younger, what do you normally do? You want to take on more risk so that over time you can have more reward. If you're older, getting into retirement, you might not want to take on as much risk. Therefore, you might not get as much reward. So that's the importance of this topic and why we're talking about it.
Yeah, no, I love it. And let's talk about what I love. There's a great line that I've used many times, is that volatility is the cost of growth, right? Volatility is the cost of growth. In other words, how much growth that you want over time, you have to be able to accept high levels of volatility in the relative short term. So when we look at the growth potential of a portfolio, and this is going to start bleeding into what we do with Riskalyze, right? So I'm actually really excited. When we help people measure risk, we utilize a tool called Riskalyze. And what this does is it helps create the expectation in our clients' minds of helping them understand when somebody says to us, we expect a portfolio return of 9% over our investment career. Well, like, to manage expectations, what you've heard me say a lot is I'll say, well, if you want to have a 9% return over a 5, 10, 15-year period, in any 6-month period, you have to be able to realize between a 20% and a 30%, a 20% loss and a 30% gain in any 6-month period. So that means if you have a $1 million portfolio, let's break it down to if you have a $100,000 portfolio and you say, I want to earn 9% as long as we work together, Kyle, I'll say, well, if you wake up in 6 months and your portfolio is worth $80,000, are you going to want to come through a brick through my window? Right?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, it's like, no. We got to pare back and help you manage the expectation, because in order to realize a 9% long-term growth rate and you can't stomach that near-term volatility, then we have to make sure we manage your expectations, because the investment experience you have has to be aligned with reasonable and realistic expectations.
Because ultimately, every investor that we work with has a different and unique risk profile. We might see commonalities, we might see trends, we might see similar things depending on somebody's age and investment experience, but really it's important for us to understand with our clients and their situations what is their tolerance for risk, because it's not always the same, even though we might expect it to be, and we might get surprised. And so how do we measure that? One of the big factors that we're looking at when it comes to risk is somebody's time horizon. If you have a long time horizon, that means you really don't need access to that money anytime soon. Traditionally, those are the types of people that can afford to take on more risk. But if somebody comes to us and tells us, hey, I need this for liquidity, I need this for...
I need to buy a house.
I need to buy a house, but I want to
get.
get more than what's in the bank. So that's where we're going to manage usually a more conservative portfolio, because we don't want to take on very much risk if they're going to need that money very soon.
Yeah, and so let's talk about how we do that. So before we invest any client's assets, it's so important that we at KPP understand and help our clients understand risk and what they're comfortable with. And if you're working with a financial advisor, we always encourage you to at least have this conversation with them, because instead of just throwing darts and picking a portfolio and hoping you beat some index that has zero to do with your life, we really want to make sure you understand why you're invested how you are, and understanding risk is key. So what we do is we utilize a process called Riskalyze, where risk is measured as a speed limit. Okay, where the speed limit 1 mile an hour is cash in the bank, whereas 99 miles an hour is a fully charged, high intensity equity position. It might be individual company stock.
Something like Tesla or any individual stock might score in the upper 90s, because one stock, it could do anything, right?
That's right. So the S&P 500 measures a 71, right? So S&P is a 71. So what we often see, and we've seen this in the last year, we've had clients or prospects actually that became clients come in and say, I'm really disappointed with my returns. I feel like I should be doing better. And it's happened twice where we've seen, after doing a Riskalyze and actually measuring the risk of these individuals' portfolios, the speed limit on the individual portfolio might be a 60 or 65. And this person has said, I want to take more risk, where their risk score, after gauging, going through a series of questions, a questionnaire that doesn't take very long at all, that individual or those individuals might be scoring it at 90 or 92. So in other words, where they were was cruising at a 60 mile an hour speed limit, their portfolio is cruising at 60, but they want to be cruising at a 94. In other words, their previous advisor, or wherever they were invested before, put a governor on their investments. So relative to the risk that those individuals were taking, those portfolios could have been doing very well relative to the level of risk, but those clients or individuals had a bad experience because their portfolio and the risk their portfolio had taken was not aligned with the level of risk that they wanted or assumed that they were taking. So if you have that disconnect, you're going to have a very bad experience. And you've heard me say it on the show, the road to disappointment is a path that's paved with failed expectations. And that is a key to successful investing.
It absolutely is. And what the Riskalyze program has allowed us to do is give a good way of quantifying risks, because there's different measurements in our world. You could talk about standard deviation, you could talk about beta. We've talked about that on the show a couple times actually, if you look at some of our past topics, but we have found that a lot of times will fly over the heads of people, so that the speed limit analogy is a really good one, because everyone can relate to a speed limit, right? You can understand what it means to go 80 miles an hour on the road. You can understand what it means to go 40 miles an hour on the road. And then whenever we look at somebody's speed limit, what they tell us based on the questionnaire, that they want, what speed limit they want to go versus what their portfolio scores. See, what Riskalyze is able to do is look at the world of investments. It's got it all in its program, and it knows how fast a certain stock, a certain mutual fund, a certain bond, it knows how fast those are going. So it's really important that we try to align those things. To Kyle's point, we find all the time that investors are just misaligned, and that right there adds incredible value, and we're able to have that discussion and give them a way that they can align it.
Yeah, and you know what I love too, how it's age agnostic is what it is, and that, generally if you're investing, people will tell you the older you are, the more conservative you should be, and that's generally because the majority of investors, the majority of Americans, quite frankly, by the time they get to retirement, they need to live on those assets. They have short-term needs, so you're going to want to preserve that portfolio. But there are many people out there. I mentioned my grandfather earlier. My grandfather would always say, there might be snow on the roof, but there's still a fire in the furnace. Right? Like, there are many clients that are in their 60s or 70s where they might have a pension, they might live where their Social Security, or they might have real estate income or other sources of revenue where they don't necessarily need to live off of the retirement assets that they've saved. And just because general society says that they're older and they need to have less risk, once we complete a risk score, we have folks in their 60s and 70s that are still cruising in at a 75 to 85 miles an hour speed limit because they have a long-term growth perspective on those assets and they don't need them for income.
It goes back to that time horizon topic that I mentioned earlier. It's all about the time horizon of those dollars. So if, to Kyle's point, if you've got pension, if you're not needing to live off of your investment portfolio, it might be for your son. It might be for your grandson. You might want to be growing those assets for your legacy. So if that's the case, why should you be in an 80 or 20-80 portfolio where 80% of it's in bonds just because you're older? If you're wanting to grow those for future generations, you probably should be more aggressive in most cases.
Especially if your risk score is at a 75 or 80. And the other thing that I love about the risk score is when we're working with couples, right? In my household, my wife is much more conservative than me, right, when it comes to money. And that part of the reason is because money just isn't her shtick. It's not her thing, right? I'm passionate about it. I talk about Social Security in my sleep, and she's probably had enough hearing me talk about this stuff in my sleep. But quite frankly, it's so important for her to understand why we're invested how we are. And because if something happens to me, God forbid, she is going to be in charge of our finances, our household, with our 4 children. And I love when we work with couples how we make sure we're incorporating both spouses in a couple. Because it's one of those things where that communication, if it doesn't happen effectively, having that conversation about risk with a team, with a couple, it really helps deepen the relationship, not only that we have with them, but oftentimes we see a deeper connection with their relationship, because it might be something that they hadn't talked about before, and you see a lot of aha moments. And making sure that when we're dealing with a couple's life savings, it's not just his, it's not just hers, it's theirs for the most part. And to be able to find that level of comfort and relatability is so key. It's so important. So when we talk about risk today, it wasn't just necessarily what risk is. Like, I really wanted to harp on that. I think we did an extraordinary job because we're that good at it, right? Talking about what risk is, but giving general explanations in the most humble way. Right?
He's the most humble person we have.
There's nobody more humble than me. It's not even close. You won't find anybody more humble. But the bottom line is that I think we did that, but really this show too, I really want to get you thinking, what's your risk score? Do you understand how much risk you're taking in your retirement portfolio? Are you invested in a way that you understand what kind of experience you'll have? Have you done any back testing? Do you know what your portfolio would have done in the market correction of 2008 or when interest rates spiked back in 2013, right? What does it look like in certain environments? And that's where, when you come in and you sit down with us, you'll be able to see what kind of experience your investing career, your investing future will look like. And it's so important to understand that risk so that you can really have a realistic expectation of whether or not you'll be able to hit your goals.
That's right. And I think that topic Kyle brought up about a couple, about a married couple, is so important, and I just want to reiterate that, because what is the number one, statistically, the number one thing that couples fight about and ultimately get divorced over? It's money.
Dinner.
Dinner.
Sorry. Money? All right.
Yeah. No, it's money. If you look at the statistics, it's money fights and it's money problems. So not only does this riskalized exercise and these conversations that we have with couples, not only does it get them on the same page with their investments and their risk about what they're taking, but it opens their eyes to see, oh, maybe we should get on the same page with our bank accounts and with our spending and with other areas that are financially related. And the husband loves that, the wife loves that. It really just strengthens that marriage, and those are some of the most special moments whenever we see that happening, and that just brings incredible value to somebody's life.
It does, and it also answers the question, well, how much cash should we keep in the bank? Well, that's really a function, in large part, of your risk score.
That's right.
Anything else?
No, I think we covered the main topics, and like we said earlier, we could get all into the weeds on terminologies as it relates to risk, but we really just wanted to keep it.
And we're biting our lip. Are we being honest? Like, we want to.
Sure.
We want to get in the weeds.
We don't need to nerd out on here. We just want you all to think about and know the importance of what it means to take on risk, why you take on risk, so you can hopefully get more reward, why you don't keep cash under a mattress, why you don't keep too much cash in a bank, and ultimately the importance of a financial plan with a financial advisor that can guide you along these topics.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. And where can you get that? It's here at KPP. We are located at the corner of Shelbyville Road and Hurstbourne Lane in the heart of Louisville's east side. We have the best view in Louisville. Right beyond these walls is the penthouse floor of the Flash Q building overlooking this beautiful city. So we encourage you to come up, check it out, sit down with us. Understanding your risk score, your tolerance for risk will really help you with your investment experience. And the more you know and the more empowered you are with this kind of information, the more likely you and your family, your loved ones will be able to live richly and realize that life that you've earned. So on behalf of everybody here at KPP, thank you for watching.